All right, well, I would like to welcome everyone to our second Imagine Nashua meeting. And I want to thank you all for agreeing to participate. We are trying to think about our community together and reimagine Nashua as we'd like to see it. Now, this is part of a formal master planning process. Our last master plan was all of 20 years ago, so we haven't done this for quite a while. One before that was around 20 years before. So we've seen a lot of changes in the last 20 years, both here and everywhere. And I think we've got a lot of new information which we can use to think about our community. Now we're going to be focusing on several areas: land use, housing, open space, economic growth, mobility and transit, arts and culture. And we want to, of course, together reimagine a community where people can build careers and better lives for themselves and their families. And so before we begin tonight's meeting and exercise, I wanted to thank particularly our master plan steering committee. We have people from all across the city. And the chair of that committee is Amber Logue, who's going to, I think, assume the chair of the meeting now. I want to thank her and all the members of the committee who've agreed to help us out and guide this. But again, going back to the beginning, we're looking for everybody's input. We want all of you to have a meaningful role in helping us reimagine our community and shape its future. So with that, I will turn you over to Amber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. There is a few housekeeping items I want to go over. Before I do that, I did just want to talk quickly about the elephant in the room. We do all know that there's a whole lot going on in Washington, D.C. Today and tonight. And while we know that that is true, as Director Marchand and the mayor had pointed out, is that this is an opportunity for us to really exercise our democracy here in our own town. So we want to make sure that this is a positive and productive conversation, and thank you all so much for being here to join us in that. Now on to the fun things, housekeeping. We do want to keep a learning mindset as we go through. We will be jumping into breakout rooms a little bit later. And so there might be some different levels to exposure of being a participant in a breakout room or not. Please keep your video off and your mute on throughout this until we go into the breakout sessions later in the meeting. Please identify yourself with your name when you are speaking, also how you're involved. Only one person we would like to speak at a time so we could all hear each other. Any live questions that you have while this is going on, use the chat. Please feel free, drop it in there. If we can answer it quickly in the chat, we will do so. And if it's something that needs some more elaboration, then we can always talk about that at the end or in the breakout sessions as well. Like I said, just during the presentation, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat box. If you do know somebody who was unable to make it tonight, or you want to share this after the meeting, or for whatever reason you need to hop off a little bit early, the video and presentation will be posted on imagine.nashuanh.gov, I believe tomorrow. Give us about at least 24 hours on that. I would like to introduce and thank the city staff who has been working unbelievably hard on this to make sure that we're kept on time and moving forward. Sarah Marchand, Matt Sullivan, and Julie Chismas. Also, I want to introduce the UTL team, who has been exceptional at making sure that we speed through this process without skipping a beat. So Elizabeth Vanderels, Will Cohen, and Taskina Tureen are all joining us this evening as well. And with that, I would like to pass this over to Taskina to start our presentation. Tuskina, you are on mute. It wouldn't be a Zoom call without calling somebody out and telling them they're on mute, right?
Yep. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Imagine Nashua Vision and Goals public workshop. I'd like to thank you all tonight for making time to come here. This is a very important public meeting because it gives us all an opportunity to come together to craft a collective vision for the master plan and also shape and prioritize overarching goals that the city hopes to achieve over time. So there are a few items that we'll be going over tonight. We'll start by giving an overview of where we are in the master planning process. We'll also share the sort of summary of engagement results and all the public feedback we've received so far. We'll also quickly go over next steps and where the project is headed and introduce the new public survey, which has been launched and is live on the website right now. But what we would really like to focus on tonight and spend majority of our time is on the goals and visioning breakout sessions, where we'll break out into smaller groups after this short presentation and have an open and collective discussion about crafting a vision together for the city and prioritizing draft goals. I'd also like to point out that the draft goals are already posted on the homepage of the Imagine Nashua website for those of you who'd like to review ahead of time. So where are we in the process? I'm going to start by briefly going over what a master plan is and what it entails, especially for those who are not able to attend the last public meeting. So a master plan is a general, all-inclusive, long-range document that will be used to guide future growth and development in the city of Nashua. It'll develop a community vision and overarching goals and provide actions and recommendations for how to achieve these goals. The master plan process in nature should be an inclusive process, and it should reflect the voices of a diverse group of stakeholders across Nashua. I also want to reiterate that the master plan is not a singular or an exclusive effort, but one that will build upon past and current planning initiatives, like some which are shown right here, the Riverfront Development Plan, as well as Livable Nashua, and combine, make sure that these plans are speaking to each other and integrate them into a comprehensive approach guiding the future of the city. And lastly, the master plan provides a basis for zoning and land use updates in the city. It won't necessarily involve a rewrite of zoning, but it'll begin the conversation for where the city needs to consider land use policy and zoning updates. So what does a master plan encompass? This master plan will be made of 3 parts. The first is the vision statement, which will be carved under 3 core values: equity, resilience, and climate protection. Tonight, we'll be working together to craft a singular vision statement together for the city. And then the master plan also consists of broad aspirational goals for each of the planning topic areas. We've discussed this in the previous meeting, but these topic areas are land use and development, housing, economic growth, mobility and transit, open space and natural resources, and arts and culture. These goals will not only be informed by the community feedback we've been receiving, but also past and current city planning initiatives, as well as existing conditions and trends analysis. And finally, the master plan will provide actions and recommendations, which are basically approaches and methods of how we're going to achieve the goals that we establish. So a quick reminder of where we are in the process. We are about wrapping up the first portion of the analytical stage, where we've developed an understanding of where Nashua as a city stands today, as well as heard from many of you where you'd like to see the city go. Tonight, we're going to push these findings and work together to begin the next stage of the process, outlining a vision and goals for the city. And then in the spring, and later into the summer, or spring into the summer, we will heavily move into plan development, conducting further analysis to begin developing recommendations and actions for achieving these goals. So I also want to take this time to remind each and every one of you that your feedback, your involvement, and your thoughts are so very important in order for this master planning process to be successful. And also to ensure that the plan outcomes reflect your needs and your wants. So I encourage each and every one of you to continue sending us comments on the website and participate in focus groups, workshops, and other public meetings coming up. So what have we heard so far? There has been a great engagement push, both from the city and the Imagine Nashua team in the last couple of months, and we've reached out to many groups across the city. We've held several small focus groups with diverse communities, ward meetings and social media outreach, including a photo and video campaign outlining everyone's vision for Nashua. The campaign is still open, so please feel free to take a photo and share what your vision for the city is. Another big aspect of this first stage of the engagement process has been the polis survey that we launched in our previous meeting. We've had 492 people fill the survey and over 215 statements submitted. While this may not seem like a large number relative to the city, we've learned from past master planning experiences that this is actually a very good showing for a first stage of a public process. And combined with the feedback we've received in smaller focus groups, as well as several online comments, we've already started to think about what the goals for the city could be. Out of the 492 participants, 372 voted throughout almost all the statements, enough so that they could be split into two groups, as you can see on your right. These groups basically show sort of how people who voted similar for or against a certain statement are in one group versus the other. Majority, as you can see, fall in group B, but they are a good number in group A, which basically shows us that the community doesn't necessarily agree on everything, and that's good because it starts to give us a point of conversation for where we should go next. But also, if you look at the dot chart at the bottom, most sorry about that. Can everyone still see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good here.
However, if we look at the dot chart at the bottom between these sort of two opinion groups, there was still overall consensus over how people voted on statements. So if we look a little closer at this, there are some clear statements that fell into sort of consensus areas. These include improving access to green space on the riverfront, quality and high-paying jobs, and increasing quality and high-paying jobs in Nashua, increasing public arts and year-round festivals. Some of the more sort of in-between voting statements were more about the sort of specific approaches and policies that we could take towards certain outcomes, such as introducing tax breaks. But the more divisive statements fell under categories of new development, and especially development around conservation areas, or how climate change impacts Nashua. Overall, there were several themes that came about from the polis survey and the focus groups. For land use, this included sort of smart growth ideas in development, having development be near services and amenities, and increasing walking and biking opportunities. Parking was a big thing that people brought up, especially in downtown. Most people agreed that Nashua has great neighborhoods, but now it's really about how we can better connect them. For housing, it was really about affordability and quality of housing. It was also about thinking about adaptive reuse or redevelopment rather than new development of housing. For mobility and transit, it was about creating more accessible sidewalks and trails, continuing efforts for complete streets, expanding transit around the city, and considering future rail connection. For economic growth, a lot of people are focused on creating more high quality jobs, having more skills and professional training, and then thinking about entrepreneurial spaces and small businesses, how Nashua can accommodate them. For open space and natural resources, as we've seen in the previous master plan, it's really about protecting and improving public access to these areas, and then thinking about reducing carbon emissions. And then for arts and culture, everyone agreed that we need more festivals, we need more events, we need to make them more seasonal, more accommodating for different parts of the year and for different people, and especially given the pandemic, thinking about how new kind of spaces can be designed. And then everyone also more or less agreed towards that local arts and culture is intrinsically related to economic development of the city. So now how do we think about how this sort of community outreach translate into goals? When someone says we should focus on education opportunities to encourage more skilled trades or training for skilled trades, we can extract an sort of important point from this, which is about economic mobility and access to opportunity. When someone talks about we need to focus on quality jobs within reach of most Nashua residents, we can think of this as job creation and retention. These are obviously just draft words that we've come up with, and they're not only informed by the community outreach, but also existing trends in the city, as well as past and current planning initiatives. So now I'll be handing it over to my colleague, Will Cohen, who is the project manager of this master plan process. He'll give us an overview of where we're headed, of what it entails to craft a vision and goal for the city, and then also introduce tonight's exercise.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So Taskina just gave you some information about what we've learned so far through this outreach process, but really where we want to go from here is to start to think about the next phase of the project so that we can keep doing our work. And that's really about this idea of the goals and the vision that she was talking about. So can you go to the next slide from here? So, she mentioned this before, right? There's the key piece of the master plan is a vision statement, a single statement that guides the point of the plan going forward. We want that the vision be informed by the three core values, which are equity, resilience, and climate protection. Within that, we have all the different topic areas we've gone over, ranging from land use all the way down to arts and culture. But we're at the stage where instead of just talking about high-level information about the city of Nashua, it's time to actually think about goals. What are the things that we want to achieve to get at the different points that Taskina was just talking about that we heard through the surveys and the various focus groups? So what we've done based on all feedback, right here's goal underneath each one of the plan elements. We have these statements which line up to those topic areas. The point, which might be a little bit high level, is we need goals aspirational and citizen-centered, means all, of course. Outcomes for each plan topic.
Well, I just to interrupt for a second.
We know that we want the city to address.
Well, you're freezing up. I just wanted to.
I'm breaking up.
You're breaking up. It's like we're.
That is terrible. I am so sorry.
Like an astronaut.
Am I still breaking up?
No.
Happy 2021.
You could try calling in. That's probably a better signal.
Yeah, it's not. Well, it's not working. You should probably call in, or maybe Taskina can pick it up, or whatever.
Oh, okay. Taskina start it, and then I'll take it from there.
Okay. So as Will was saying, and as I mentioned earlier in the process, that tonight is really about crafting the vision and goals for the city. And this diagram here basically shows the framework for how we're thinking about the master plan. Tonight, we're going to work together to create a vision statement and then think about goals for each of the plan topic areas. We've already drafted some of these goals, and tonight from you, we want to have a discussion about what's missing, what should we add, and what are other things that we should be thinking about. So this is a draft vision statement. It is not something we are tied to, but something that we've created, and we want each and every one of you later tonight to talk to us and think about what single statement will represent Nashua as a city in this master plan. So I won't spend too much time on this because we'll spend a lot of time in the breakout sessions crafting this together. And then another thing that we want to reiterate is that The goals are not just determined by the community feedback that we've received so far, but a lot of it is also informed by the trends and the research that we've done into the city. Nashua is seeing many things that many changes that we've talked about in the last public meeting, including sprawl. When compared to other cities such as Concord and Manchester and New Hampshire, Nashua has a great deal of sprawl development that puts a strain on its sort of revenue that it gets from its downtown. So we have to place a focus on downtown and think about what it represents for Nashua's growth. In terms of housing, over 50% of the current housing is single family housing. And when we look at the generational shifts that are happening across Nashua and across the country, we see that the greatest cohort that's increasing are people over the age of 55. So we have to think about what housing actually means for sort of empty nesters and sort of millennials who are increasing in the city. And then economically, we have to think about what are the jobs that Nashua has right now, and what can people actually afford? Housing is very expensive in Nashua, and based on just average earnings, most people in industry sectors cannot afford the current city's median home sales price. So this also goes into thinking about mobility and transit, open space, and arts and culture. When we think about all these topics, we have to understand that any policy, especially our land use policies, should strike a balance between all these different topic areas so that we create a healthy ecosystem that takes into consideration transportation, community amenities, open space resources, and housing. So I won't go into further about all these sort of existing trends because we've created a report that gives a high-level overview of sort of the major things, the major items affecting Nashua today. And you can find this on the website and the homepage and look into it further. It might even, if you look through it right now, it might even help you talk about the goals and the vision tonight to understand better where the city stands today. So I also want to talk about how I know that the vision and goals might seem very high level for certain people, and they want to get really into the sort of specific actions right away. But we have to understand that there's various plans happening around Nashua with very specific agendas, whether it's transportation related or whether it's housing related. So the master plan is a great opportunity to sort of step back, think about tying all these together through a common vision, common goals, and then go a little more into detail about actions. So goals can start off by being very high level, enhancing access to better connect Nashua's existing space network. But these can very well become improving signage and wayfinding for all public access points in the riverfront, or identifying trails that are appropriate for ADA accessibility. Another example is a goal might be really high level, like creating places reflecting Nashua's diverse culture, where residents and visitors can not only live and work, but also play. But this can become more specific. This can become working with existing city departments to incorporate free arts and cultural programming, or identifying a public location where that can serve as a city venue for arts and culture in the future. So even though this seems very high level, this process will allow us to make more specific decisions for the city. Which brings us to Public Survey 2, which is the opportunity for every one of you to give more specific feedback where you want to see the city go. This will be done via a digital mapping platform survey, so it's a little different from our first survey. This survey is already live on the Imagine Nashua website, so you can all start filling it out right now if you'd like. But once you click on the map, you'll have three options. Three options of choosing where in Nashua would you like to see something maintained or protected. Tell us what's great about this location and why it should stay the way it is. Where in Nashua would you like to see new development or redevelopment? What's missing from this location? And what would you like to see improved or like to see new there? And the last one is, what would you like to see improve about a location? Is there something that is just being underused right now and could be used differently? So please go into the Imagine Nashua website and please take the survey. Like I said, your input, Your involvement and your feedback is very important to this process. So the more you tell us about what you want for the city, what you want to see, where you want to see the city go, the more we know where to take it. So that brings us to tonight's exercise. We'll all be breaking out into smaller groups right now to talk about crafting a vision together, as well as defining and prioritizing goals for each of the planned topic areas. Again, I'll reiterate that the goals are going to be under each planned topic area, which is land use and development, housing, mobility and transit, economic growth, open space and natural resources, and arts and culture. And then I'm going to also remind everyone that these goals, these draft goals, have been formed through an understanding of past and current city planning efforts, existing conditions, trends analysis, and everything that we've heard so far from community engagement. They are draft goals, they are not final, and tonight we need your input to get them there. So we're gonna break it into smaller groups, and then we're going to first talk about goals. And we don't have to go through each topic area, but whatever topic area seems most important per group, we can talk about that. So if you all go into the Imagine Nashua website now, you should be able to access the goals document. So you can start looking through it now, as I said earlier. And yeah, I think that's about it. We can just get started.
I hope you all found some value in these breakout rooms. I know ours had a very lively conversation across all the different goals and visions. Time is short and we want to respect your time. So what we'd like to do before we close out is have a quick chance for each one of the groups to do a quick report back of just the main highlights. And so if we could go maybe in order of the rooms, is that possible, Sarah? We could start with room number 1. I don't know if every room knows what their numbers are.
They might. Room number 1 was Elizabeth, was the facilitator. Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay, so nobody wanted to volunteer to report back, so I said I would take one for the team. We had a really robust conversation. We talked a lot about transportation, housing, and economics and land use. One of the big things for transportation was that we wanted non-car users to feel more comfortable traveling through Nashua, especially if they're on bike lanes. So we really liked the goals that integrated safety and thought that those should be expanded upon. We talked a lot about making sure that there's different job opportunities for everyone in Nashua, not just things that are tied to maybe working at a retail store, but also a greater robust option of jobs. We also talked a lot about revisiting land use and zoning codes and making sure that the process is equitable and exploring more options for density. And with the vision statement, we talked a lot about how we could reword it and making sure that we're incorporating things that promote Nashua as a great place to be. One of our kind of initial statements was Nashua as a place that promotes economic, housing, social, and cultural opportunities. So we're excited to keep wordsmithing and seeing what we end up with. That's it.
All right, lovely. So I was in room 2, and similarly, we had some members who were reticent to be the guinea pigs among the whole group. So I'll be the spokesperson for you all, and now that I'm called in on the phone, it should work. I would say across the goals, we had a lot of feedback on specific goals, but more to the point, there was one big thing which many of the members in our group didn't see at all, which was really education. And while, we talked about how education may not be, pedagogy may not be a piece of the plan, relating it to children and children's opportunity for learning and ideas around lifelong learning, wanted to see that both in various pieces of the existing goals, or maybe finding a way to, put a new goal in there. And there are ways that could tie both to housing, about families and households, to jobs, about relationships between schools and businesses, to open space and places for people to be learning, and for students to be learning. But then also that some version of that, whether it's about families or education, we weren't exactly sure. Something about that needs to go into the vision statement too, as another piece. That was one thing that needed to go into the vision. And the other piece was there was some frustration around the idea of reduces the dependence on the automobile. One, why is the vision being negative about a thing that which you aren't going to do? But more importantly, maybe it's something about alternate modes of transportation or improving walkability, to talk about electric cars or other kinds of initiatives that aren't just about not doing cars. And so those are the two, big takeaways. And so room 3 was Taskina's room. So I don't know who would like to go from that one.
So we did have someone willing to speak, the lovely Liz Fitzgerald. So I'll let her say talk about our conversation.
Okay, I didn't actually want to volunteer, but I'm just super obedient, so I'll do my best. I don't know if I have all the notes. We did kind of overall feel like the goals were like at a high level, well stated, underneath that is kind of where we wanted to dive in. So I think the next round will be interesting for us. The idea of Nashua being a connected community came up in a couple of the different goals, sort of focusing on this idea of like our neighborhoods and connecting people to the neighborhoods they belong to, and like an overall sense of belonging and ownership for the people. It like could be called out a little stronger in both the vision statement and also in some of the goals where it was connected to. We talked a lot about seniors and accessibility to like where their housing is, and either in private homes or also in facilities, and access to like more walking and safety and things like that. And we talked about like, I think it was in the economic section of goals related to like businesses, and it came out of discussion about like some of the restaurants, the ethnic restaurants that are grouped on Canal Street. There's a little section of Latino restaurants. We can't always close down Main Street for fairs and festivals, but can we look at some of these other neighborhoods and create like opportunities to develop those as places where we can have street fairs and festivals, and go to the businesses so they don't have to we don't have to try to drag them to Greeley Park, and then they can't afford to have staff at their restaurant and host an event and be like creating opportunities for fair that are local business owners. So we talked about that a little bit. In terms of the vision statement, we thought it could be flipped, and that the first part of the vision statement about being what is it, like equitable and resilient and caring for the climate were the how, but the what was more the second part of that, like what are the tasks that we're going to do, and like putting it more about the people. Like Nashua is a connected community that will create these opportunities for the people, because that's for us felt like that was an important thing. But how we will do that is by being equitable and being resilient and being mindful of climate change. Did I miss anything? I missed everything, but that's the best I could do.
You did great.
Awesome.
So Tim was room 4.
Yeah, I mean, we had Scott and Mary Ellen in my group, so we actually rewrote the zoning. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know, Scott, do you want to take a stab at it, or should we do a combo? Why don't you take notes and I can.
Sure, I took notes.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, the team as a whole, like I said, it was very interesting because it ended up getting reasonably policy directed, because we had both planning and zoning and historical commission all on the team here, but we focused heavily on the land use and development draft goal slide, if you will, thinking that all the other portions of the goals, whether it was housing or transportation, mobility, economic growth, where the goal was here to drive it through land use and development. So we dug in on that. There was a lot of talk about sort of revitalizing the downtown, making it more mixed use and more sort of multimodal down there, and having more activity down there and increasing the density there, but not so much as you got to the perimeters of the city. So not focusing on density out there as much, encouraging different types of transportation, paying attention to the accessibility of the city quite a bit, and being able to get in and out of it, you know, with not just cars and but with multiple modes of transportation. But a lot about balance. You know, we talked about, should we, you know, increase lot sizes as we go out of the city? You know, should we have a standard size? Even things like that came up. We did dig into the vision statement a bit, and like some of the other groups that already talked, we thought the sort of the direct reference to the automobile was kind of a negative connotation as well, and we kind of replaced that with encouraging transportation alternatives versus just, you know, dialing directly at an automobile. So that was one of the change we talked about. And we really like that last part about supporting, and we changed it to supporting because we already had encouraged from the transportation alternative to supporting targeted density and neighborhood appropriate development patterns. And that was almost like a theme of our group with that last part, for sure. And does that sound about right, Tim?
Yeah, and I just want to add that what was so great about our group is that we actually wrote a new draft of the vision statement. So which is great. So we have an improved draft that I think addressed some of the things that Liz talked about. So we spent some time wordsmithing even. That was good.
All right, wonderful. All right, Matt Sullivan was room 5. So Matt Sullivan's room.
Great, thank you. Well, we had to battle for our sort of spokesperson to represent us, but luckily Alderman Lopez volunteered to do so. So I'm going to pass it off to him to discuss what we talked about.
I won the election. So we looked at the goal statement particularly. So I think that's a good place to start. We, like everyone else, objected to the word automobile. And I mean, particularly that word is potentially a red herring. And we thought that multimodal transportation might be a better term, and trying to frame it more as opportunities rather than trying to move away from certain things. We debated whether or not terms like equitable and resilient were accessible to individuals who might be reading this. We were all somewhat advanced professionals, so we wanted to make sure we weren't necessarily endorsing something that turned out to be jargon to somebody else. But I think we all agreed ultimately that it wasn't the terms that would necessarily need to change, but maybe start the goal statement off with more of an emotional, ideological comment, something like Nashua is a welcoming city, or Nashua is a city of opportunity, something to bring the reader in and to kind of frame what would come next, and then include those characteristics such as equity and resilience as how we would be achieving specific goals. We talked about the different areas of the different slides that we had, and for example, how exactly the access to housing demographics were made up, like low income being $37,000 or less, and being able to buy a home for $60,000. Some things like that may not necessarily be specific to Nashua's situation, and could be maybe fine-tuned a little bit. We were looking at some of the arts and culture aspect, and particularly looking at how we viewed culture and ethnicity, and maybe including an element of endorsing mental wellness or health and well-being. There are other areas where access to healthcare was something that we talked about, but differentiating between an illness model versus a wellness model is the difference between going to the doctor because you're sick and going to a coach because you want to be healthy. So we talked about some things like that. We talked about different housing equity models, housing access, as it is a major priority in the city. Betsy presented an idea based on the Washington, D.C. model where maybe we would incorporate a policy of when landlords are looking to sell their housing, multi-unit housing, then residents had the opportunity to create an association to purchase that. She actually volunteered to advocate for that when the landlord association shows up, so I thought that was very nice of her. And we basically just looked at some of the terminology with an eye towards refining it so it was more accessible to people that might be less familiar with city policy and more interested in learning about it or getting involved and maybe engaging. I think that was overall a theme that we had, that we wanted to make sure that the master plan is engaging rather than, quote, educational, so that we can get more people who have, you know, a culture of self investigation and investment in the community to more accurately represent some of the different diverse groups that we can't necessarily anticipate.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, moving right along. Room number 6 was Jamin Carr's room.
So under duress, Cole agreed to be our spokesperson. So I'm going to say, take it away, Cole, and then I can jump in and backfill if necessary.
Yeah, thanks. If I miss anything, just jump in at the end. So the notes I have here were questioning whether population density is the goal of this, whether to increase it. That seems to come up quite a bit. Lots about mobility, connection, both in connection of areas, how to get there, what should be connected, green space to neighborhoods, neighborhood to neighborhood, green space to green space. Lots of connection. Housing affordability, both for rental, purchase, starter homes. Lots of just general improvements of obtaining and purchasing housing, adding livability to the goals, so creating more opportunities to work directly in the neighborhood you live in, potentially focusing on attracting businesses that can be attractive to either younger or new demographics or things that we want as far as qualities in our citizens in Nashua. As an example, younger citizens or residents. Potentially focusing on things like municipal broadband or technology, things that could make us not just green space attractive, but technologically attractive. Focusing on, again, this was said a couple times, not the negative with the positive. So instead of reducing automobile use, focus on the increase of active and public transportation. Something for the mission statement to potentially include not just residents, but again, who we might want to serve for future residents. Again, attracting younger generations, so forth, and then adding safety into some of the statement goals, something that we didn't see mentioned. Jay, did I miss anything?
Yeah, that was a really good summary. I think just a couple of things I would add. We did have a conversation around equity. What does that mean? And so, you know, I think to Tom's point, that's something that we might want to think about or flush out. And just in terms of, we didn't have the opportunity to redraft the vision statement, but there were some thought about what is missing. Words like welcoming, that came up somewhere else. We're a welcoming community. Also, health. You know, one, you know, do we want to be a healthy city? Are we a healthy city? Is that something we want to talk about in the vision statement? It also came up when we were talking about goals. You know, just in general, goals around increasing public health. And we did talk specifically about, well, one, just backing up a bit, addressing root causes of poverty. So not just, you know, kind of some of the symptoms, but getting to root causes, in improving health access to healthy foods. Particularly in our inner city areas, addressing issues like lead paint, looking at some of these key causal issues. And definitely there's also a fair amount of conversation around education and in particular skill development with a focus on trades and community colleges. So I think it's
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Room number 7 was Mason's room.
Okay, so we were still kind of deep in conversation at the end, so I'm gonna, you know, kind of present what we did talk about. And if anybody else that was in my group wants to chime in afterwards, just feel free. So we did talk about in the goals section, and I think somebody else mentioned it earlier, that maybe education should be highlighted or focused more in certain, in a couple of different bullets. Like there is one bullet that's specific about job training, et cetera, and it's kind of all lumped together. But I think that they were kind of pointing to that being a really big, a really big thing that could be important in the future as far as, education and, different types of specialized trainings. And then, so that was really most of what we talked about for goals. And then for making the vision statement, we did also kind of address that some of the statements in the words are a little bit like inaccessible. They kind of seem, bigger, not as exciting, I guess. We kind of talked about how, using some good words like engaging or vibrant or something that makes you kind of interested in the city. And, some of like the words like equitable and stuff, they're good words and they hold a lot of value, but they do sound dry and they sound like something that's, in a very, dry document. So it's like, that's a recurring theme in a lot of planning things. But anyway, yeah. And then we also talk a lot about in the vision about, kind of focusing on all the things that Nashua does have and not the things that it's missing. And focusing on, kind of creating a place that people can live, from, a young age all the way through their old age, and a place where you can afford to do that. So that got into kind of the housing affordability, and, being a community that, allows an elderly person to live in a unit that is, a good size for them, et cetera. So that was another thing that we focus on. Yeah. And then it being kind of a place that people can be proud of and, be proud of the culture, proud of the history, and, want to come back to and want to, not go away to school and then not come back. So that was kind of the majority of it. And if anybody else has anything, feel free to add.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Room 8 was Cassie's room.
So we also were still in conversation, so I'm going to take Mason's approach and present, and if anyone has anything to add, please feel free to jump in. But for discussing goals, we spent a lot of time talking about housing and promoting diversity and especially affordability. That was very important to most people. And same thing with density, but also how there's different situations, especially with housing for different parts of the city. How downtown is completely different than like South Nashua and on the outskirts of Nashua. So really affordable housing was a big thing, accessible housing, encouraging a lot of diversity and welcoming that was a big goal. And for the vision statements, we talked a lot about how even though Nashua is a city and it's a larger developed group of people, how it still has a small community feel, how people still feel like they're part of a community. And they wanted to mention that in the vision statement, because it's, a lot of people love having that feeling, and it's nice having all of the amenities and services that a city offers, but it's awesome that Nashua also has that smaller sense of community and getting to know people. We also talked a little bit about, sustainability and maintaining the mix of all the different kinds of businesses and housing and opportunity, and really making Nashua a place that works for both younger generations as well as older generations. And that's pretty much our major themes that we talked about. I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add, but.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Room 9 was Adam's room.
Yes, thank you. So our group spent the bulk of our time talking about arts and culture and recreational opportunities. And a lot of the focus of that discussion was about, increasing resources, increasing opportunities, I think particularly in other areas of the city. So we talked about having, more indoor and outdoor spaces, both for cultural opportunities and recreational opportunities that might be more accessible to, residents of the city who are, in the downtown neighborhoods in particular, but maybe, for certain residents who might have close access to those resources and others who may not, as well as residents of the city who might have other access limitations. We also talked about having just a larger number of, spaces for cultural opportunities. For example, one of the comments was, that there's a desire to see more mixed use spaces in the city, and particularly mixed use spaces that would, allow for, public events, and that may not be something that's necessarily consistent with, a lot of the zoning requirements right now. Also, having, more theater space, for example. There was a comment that, while we have some theater space now, it would be nice to have an opportunity to have smaller theater spaces that might not, be suited to the, the larger theater spaces that we have or that are contemplated. Also, there was a sense that there was, a focus in the goals on downtown, but that, there should be a desire to see, the other areas of the city promoted as well, and to focus on other neighborhood centers that may be outside of the downtown area. And then there was also a discussion about, perhaps trying to, implement policies that would encourage, businesses to make themselves maybe more accessible to, to residents who might have more limited means. In terms of the vision statement, we had a couple of specific comments on the language that was presented, in particular the word resident that's used in the vision statement now. There was a sense that we might be able to use something that's a bit more all-inclusive, like community members. And there was also a concern about the language regarding targeted density and the preserving of neighborhood structures, a sense that maybe that was suggesting that the density would be in the already denser parts of the city, but that elsewhere in the city would be sort of the goal would be to leave things as they are. And so there were some sensitivity concerns about that. We also did come up with just an entirely different alternative vision statement. We discussed, in some ways that simpler may be better. And so our alternative vision statement was, let's make Nashua a great place to live, work, and raise a family today and tomorrow. So I think that pretty much covers it, but Amber, who's the note taker in our group, I would ask her to pipe in if she thinks I've missed anything.
Sorry, I was typing up our notes. You got it. It was all good.
Great.
All right, cool. Thanks. All right, 3 more rooms. So room 10, that was Justin's room.
Perfect. So I'll do the goals that we discussed, and then Cecilia will actually go through and talk about the changes we made at the vision statement. So for the goals, some areas of emphasis that we talked about related to mobility and transit. One area that we thought extra emphasis should be placed on is pedestrian and bicycle networks, increasing safety and promoting improvements to those so that people feel more comfortable using those transportation systems rather than just focusing on our normal roadway networks. For open space and natural resources, one other area that was discussed was trying to promote access to the Merrimack River rather than just focusing on the Nashua River. So that was an additional thing that was added in. Another area that we discussed, really didn't have a good idea of how to write it out, but How do we incentivize open space that might be privately owned to remain open space? What types of actions can be done by the city to purchase properties, repurpose properties, those types of things. And then arts and culture, there was a lot of consensus on the goal around cultural diversity, raising awareness and understanding of the city and its communities, and nurture the cultural traditions of Nashua's diverse groups. People liked the way that was written, so we wanted to throw our support that way. And then I'll turn it over to Cecilia to review the vision statement changes.
Thank you, Justin. So our group really had a great conversation about the draft vision statement, and we came up with a few wordsmiths, if you will, for a few different things. One of them was, instead of and protect the climate, we could say sustainable instead. Another one was suggesting including education. So replace or adding it to the quote, Nashua will be equitable, resilient, and protect the climate as it promotes educational, job, and housing opportunities. And then the last one was where it says reduces dependence on the automobile, to add after automobile fossil fuels, to include that as well.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, room 11, that was Jennifer's room.
Hi, I'm going to share out for our group. It was a pretty small group, but we still had a great discussion. We focused on housing, transit, and economic growth primarily. The group felt strongly that we needed diversity of employers in the city, and especially more large employers. We talked about how especially when you first come to Nashua, the economy seems to all be retail outlets. We also talked about the need for housing diversity, more affordable housing, more types of housing. And then we talked about how housing and economic growth kind of both are connected to transit, getting people moving through the city. One interesting part of our discussion, we talked a little bit about a multimodal transit center in that center in Lowell, and how we might feel a little bit differently about that now after the pandemic, and what the scale of something like that should be. So there was general agreement that it was important, but maybe it would look a little bit differently than we had imagined it a year ago. There was also a thread of safety. I think a couple of other groups have brought that up, that people would like to see public safety mentioned or included in some of the goals. We talked a little bit about arts and culture, and in particular, the goal that talks about arts and culture as a priority as it relates to economic growth. And there was some feeling that while it was important and people generally supported it, that the priority maybe should be other areas, investing more in housing diversity and employment diversity, and maximizing the use of current facilities rather than making that a priority for now. The vision statement did not hold up well with my group. We generally did not, weren't super fans. Comments along the lines of, it sounds like a planner wrote it, and the language didn't seem particularly accessible. But rather than just complaining, we did have two concrete suggestions. One is just end it at the word residence and chop off that whole second half. And like everyone else, we thought including the word automobile was a little bit peculiar. And we got done early, so Teresa had time to craft another draft vision statement, which she shared with Noah, our note taker. So that will be included in our report out. And that's it.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And finally was room 12, that was John's room.
Hi, I'm Carrie. There was a note taker for that group. I didn't know if John was gonna respond first, so I'll just start, I guess. Anyways, actually, I think he had to hop off. That reminds me. All right, so this is a little bit repetitive because other groups kind of talked about the same things we did, but we talked a lot about connectivity and connected communities, and having like communities connected so that if one community is, accessible, that it's still connected to areas around it, so that it's not just like sort of like an island kind of thing. And then we talked a lot about what is a lot of people were wondering what equity was in the vision statement. So someone had a good suggestion to maybe we could switch the term equity with the term socially responsible, because maybe it's a little bit more cohesive and maybe more specific in kind of saying like encompassing everyone kind of thing, because Nashua is a welcoming city, and I think it's sort of socially responsible maybe better defines just, I guess, encompassing everyone. And we were also curious, actually, I think some other folks had said about what Nashua would look like with a reduction in the use of automobiles and how that would be achieved. I mean, if we get rail at some point in the near future, that might have an impact on that. But definitely, I mean, the consensus was that you still pretty much need a car to get around. I mean, even just for some things, maybe if not all the time. And then there was a consensus that we have a lack of affordable housing, that, I mean, I know we're working on that right now, but it needs to be a little bit better. So what else? I think, and there was one neighborhood in particular that a couple of people mentioned in the South End that seemed like it was designed for people who just live there and like go to Boston. Like they don't actually like spend time in the neighborhood. So there could maybe be some things done to like actually get people to be in their neighborhood. And I think that was it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So I know that we went a little bit long because we had a lot of good feedback to share. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So the very last thing which I want to say before we break for the evening is one, thank you so much for all this information. We're going to collect all of this and use it. Obviously, we're not going to be able to use everyone's revised vision statement verbatim, since now there's 12 new ones to work with, but we're going to try our best to merge this together into something cohesive. So that's sort of one of our big tasks. So, from the planning processes perspective, the vision and the goals is the first thing. And where we're going to go from here as a planning team is to think about spatial planning and scenario analysis. Now it becomes sort of the more fun, more detailed stuff. And so we're going to be working with some more of the sub-consultants and be getting into, more specific things throughout the city of Nashua. In the meantime, we still need things from you as well. And so there's two different ways to make that happen. Right. One is if you have additional feedback, you can always come let us know. There's still room to, provide information on social media, and we'll be continuing to promote things throughout various different media. But on the website right now, there's this second survey, which just went over earlier, which is the ability to place points on the city of Nashua's map for things that you want to improve and things that you like, things that you would want to redevelop or develop, and provide feedback on that. And then also for other people's comments that they've already placed, you have the ability to say that you like or dislike those comments. And so that's where we would really like targeted, geographically specific information, because that'll help us as we're not just finalizing the visions and goals, but starting to think about, some of the spatial stuff and some of the more specific policies. So that's where we'd like you to sort of weigh in next and encourage everyone to do the same thing. It's right on the Imagine Nashua website. Similarly, the next big public meeting that we're going to have is in April. We're still finalizing the date, but stay tuned for that. And until April, in addition to having all this kind of feedback, Sarah and the rest of the city team will be hard at work organizing additional focus groups and other kinds of events for outreach. And so we are eager to continue to hear from you all, and we hope to hear it through all these different means. And I don't know if Sarah wants to say anything else.
Thank you. If you have a group of family or friends that you want to Zoom with, or if you belong to a group or a club, a book club, and you wouldn't mind having us have a conversation about Imagine Nashua for a couple minutes, please reach out and let us know. Matt and Julie and I are available. We've done quite a few of these. All of the feedback we get from these feed groups goes into the same format of notes and information in the background of this. And we are more than happy to get any kind of feedback and have conversations that maybe with smaller groups that are a little bit easier, like we did at breakouts tonight. So thank you all very much. And please let other people know about that this is going on. Help us spread the word. The more people we get involved, the better off this will be.